These here are the 1997 to 99 Orion V CNGs, the first Orion V CNGs, and the third fleet of compressed natural gas buses for the private bus lines. Now, they were ordered by the NYCDOT for both local and express bus services. The private bus lines embraced these Orion Vs, as they did earlier with the 1989 Orion I CNGs, specifically only for the Brooklyn private bus lines. And in 1997, the NYCDOT was given an Orion V CNG demo numbered as 4932, which ran for passenger service out of Command Bus Company. Then it later went to QueensBuses Corporation under the same fleet number. And once the test was all finished, the NYCDOT made a purchase of 301 Orion V CNGs in total for 3 out of the 7 private bus lines. So without further ado, we're gonna hit the list of private bus lines and fleet numbers of these Orion V CNGs. So let's begin. So 4932 to 4975 were delivered to Command Bus Company and were painted in green and yellow, with 4932 being a 1997 prototype, 4933 to 4973 along with 4975 being 1998 units, and 4974 being a 1999 unit. Also, 4932 to 4949 were the only units to be delivered with a black trimming, while 4950 to 4975 were the units that were not delivered with the black trimming. Anyways, 396 to 581 were delivered to QueensBuses Corporation and were painted in orange and white, with 500 to 581 being 1998 models, and 396 to 499 being 1999 models. QueensBuses Corporation was the only private bus line to operate the largest fleet of Orion V CNGs, with 185 units in total. That's a record. And last but not least, 3,000 to 3071 were delivered to Triborough Coach Corporation and were painted in a sharp red and white paint scheme. 3,000 to 3,016 were the only units to be delivered with a black trimming, while 3,017 to 3032, along with 3034 to 3048, as well as 3050 to 3066, were the units that were not delivered with a black trimming and were only painted in the red and white paint scheme. 3033 and 3049 and 3067 to 3072 were the units that were not delivered with the black trimming or the red stripe and were delivered with the naked white paint scheme. Now, moving on to the specs that these Orion V CNGs were delivered. They carried a few similarities, similar to their sisters from New York City Transit, and a few differences, such as the push-type exit doors that were driver-operated, the Luminaire Megamax flipped-out destination signs, and all of their windows being openable. They also lack the use of hoodlum lights, and some of these buses were delivered with the 2x2 Suburban seats, while others were delivered with the 2x2 hard seats. What's most unique about these Orion V CNGs, 10 units from QueensBuses Corporation originally came with the blackback paint scheme before being repainted into the whiteback, which I honestly find it to be disappointing. A few units from other companies, such as Command or Triborough, were given the golden LED destination signs. However, some of them were given back the flip dots, while the others kept their LED destination signs. Now moving on to the powertrain, which will blow your mind. Instead of these Orion V CNGs, signifying the use of the more common Cummins L10G engine with the ZF Ecomat 5HP 590 transmission or Allison B400R transmission, these Orion V CNGs signify the use of the extremely powerful Detroit Diesel Series 50G engine with the Allison B400R WTEC transmission. But these, on the other hand, can ring pretty loud and can make a pretty mean backfire too, which I honestly think is amazing. Check it out. QueensBuses units 404 to 437 were pretty unique units because those signify the use of the advanced John Deere 6081H engine with the Allison B400R WTEC transmission. Just like their younger sisters, the Orion V CNGs that were built between 2005 and 2007, and together they sound like this. So, what do I think about these buses? Honestly, they're the best. They're my number one favorite besides the Orion 5s from the Westchester County. And honestly, they deserve a good reputation because without these Orion 5s, my childhood would be completely different. But for my personal favorites, honestly, I think the QueensBuses Corporation units stand out the most, besides the one from Triborough Coach or Command Bus Company. When MTA took over all of the 7 private bus lines, 99.9% of these units were retained by the MTA, as the 0.1% did not survive due to an accident before the takeover. And by 2007, 300 units remained in service. So, here's a list of Orion V CNGs that were renumbered. So 8568 to 8581, along with 9827 to 9999 were ex-QueensBuses Corporation units. 708 to 751 were ex-Command units. And last but not least, 7214 to 7285 were ex-Triborough Coach units. Many of these Orion V CNGs were given the MTA decals, as they were later fully repainted into the blue and white paint scheme. Meanwhile, 7214 to 7285 were removed from LaGuardia Depot after the CNG facility caught fire and exploded, resulting in LaGuardia Depot no longer being eligible for CNG buses. And, as a result, 7214 to 7285 were transferred and split between College Point Depot and Spring Creek Depot. During the years of the takeover, many of the College Point units were assigned to Eastchester Depot to operate on the QBX1 route until it was split in half as the Q50 and BX23. And after those two routes were made, they went through a long journey. For example, some of these units were given back to College Point Depot, while a few others were given to West Farms Depot at New York City Transit. And shortly after that, 13 units were transferred to Jackie Gleason Depot after Jackie Gleason Depot gave away their Orion V CNGs to College Point Depot until they were retired in 2010. In December of 2011, many of these Orion V CNGs, including the ones from MTA Bus, were assigned to Long Island Bus shortly before Nice Bus took over in the beginning of 2012. A few of them retired under Long Island Bus, as many of these units were later given back to the MTA and continued running for passenger service until their retirement in 2014. By 2013, the units that were at Jackie Gleason Depot were retired, while some were given to Spring Creek Depot and stayed there until they were also retired. Meanwhile, in Queens, the units from College Point Depot were given to LaGuardia Depot due to a shortage that they were suffering from, and towards the end of the year, many of these Orion V CNGs started to leave the property. And by 2014, all of these Orion V CNGs were retired and scrapped, marking the end of the Orion V CNG era for MTA Bus and New York City Transit, period. Before we move on with this review, let's hear some thoughts and opinions about these Orion V CNGs by my good friend Cedric, aka Vulnerable Toyota. Take it away, Cedric.
Hello, MTA fanners, and this is Cedric as Vulnerable Toyota, in which most of you guys know me as King Auto and Excelsior Dispatcher. And I'm excited to contribute to Brian's Orion V CNG contributions. These Orion V CNGs in this series are what I call the best awarded legendary Orion 5s in this series and for the source of compressed natural gas. When having their times at the private bus lines and being owned by the Department of Transportation, they showed tremendous interest with their colors, including the rims that best matches the potential for a classic Orion V model. Until July 2011, it was at nighttime when my mother and I rode a 1999 Orion V CNG on the B35 across East Flatbush. It was a sufficient ride compared to the 1995 model I rode in 2007 with lighter traffic and the takeoff that makes this bus have a heavy windscape exhaust rain. That was my only time riding this Orion V and my second time riding this model since 2007. By 2014, these Orion Vs have ended their lives gracefully after reminding us of having tremendous runs with the private bus lines, MTA Bus Company, New York City Transit, and Long Island Bus. And especially, be on the lookout for my remake of the review for these Orion Vs than the one I created last year. And so now this is the end of my contribution. Thank you guys for watching, and I'm bringing you back to Brian as Sonic 57053, the Transit Fanner.
And from my other good friend, Clayson, aka New York Bus Guy. Take it away, Clayson.
Hey everyone, here's my contribution to Sonic 57053's review of the Orion V CNG from the private lines. My talk will mainly be about the units from Jackie Gleason and Spring Creek Depot, so here we go. So I first saw these units from Jackie Gleason in 2010 on the B35 on Church Avenue. I liked how they sounded. Every time they would accelerate after they would stop at a bus stop or at the light, they would ring, which was such pleasant music to my ears. I would literally fall in love with hearing the sounds and go on YouTube whenever I get home and listen to the recordings of these buses from Jackie Gleason. My goodness, I just loved it. The good old days. The unit I remember from Gleason, however, is 9911 when I saw it on the B35, and back then it had MTA bus decals. You know, back then I had no idea these were ex-Power Lines Orion V CNGs. I always thought these were New York City Transit originals, but of course when you get older you realize certain things. Man, I miss the old days of seeing these on the B35. I saw these buses on the B8 as well, and that was also good to see. As for Spring Creek Depot, I remember seeing these buses on the B100 and B103. A unit from Spring Creek I definitely remember was 749. It had an advertisement at the back of the bus like for a design. It was pretty cool to see that. Also, some units I remember seeing a few of the 700 series, along with I believe two 7200 series on the B103 alongside 9860. 9860 was the last unit I saw back in 2013 on the B103. It's a shame that these buses are gone now, but these were very good buses back then, especially with how they rang and just how they were overall. With that, back to you, Brian.
When I first encountered these Orion V CNGs during the takeover, I immediately fell in love with them. Not just the bus itself, but the sound, the ringing, and the backfire is what made me a transit fan myself. Even though I didn't have a chance to record them because, well, I was just young back then. But at least I got to ride them on a Q65 back when I was living between Hillside and Jamaica. Though in my opinion, I think these buses are way better than the older C40LFs and the Orion 7 CNGs. And honestly, they deserve a good reputation because without the Orion 5 CNGs, MTA bus would have been completely different, and my childhood will also be different. So as for these Orion 5 CNGs, these buses are gone, but they're not forgotten, and will always be remembered as the private line and MTA bus company's best fleet of Orion 5 CNGs. So with that said, this is Sonic 57053, thanking you guys for watching.